Good morning, everybody. My name is Russell Robson, and I'm here today to talk to you about major events and command and control. I'll just give a little bit of an overview of my background first, so you know the where I'm from and the previous event experience and police experience that I have. But I joined the police force looking at you probably before most of you were born. So I joined the police in 1983 and served in the UK police for 30 years, during which time I have worked in virtually every branch of the police service you could possibly imagine. So everything from head of the dog support unit all the way through to head of firearms units, spontaneous firearms commanders, as well as head of the communications within Durham Constabulary, which is a constabulary in the north of the UK. When I retired from the police service in 2013, I was asked to work in the events world, and I did some event work for the Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games. And it was supposed to be a very short contract that I was going to continue with my retirement after that. Fortunately or unfortunately, I've remained in that events world ever since. So I've worked on a number of international events, including the 2015 Rugby World Cup, where I was head of security, some contract work for World Rugby, and then through to the World Athletics in London 2017, UK security advisor to the organising committee of the Pan American Games in 2019, and then I am now here working as an advisor to the MOI on event-wide C4, which is Command, Control, Coordination and Communication and Information. So I think it's probably useful to have a little bit of a review of what C4 is. And it's a word or an acronym which is bandied around quite regularly, but there are different understandings of what it is. So I thought it would be useful, and forgive me if I'm preaching to the converted and people who already know what it is, but I thought it would be useful just to give a little bit of explanation of what C4 is. So C4, as you can see there, command, control, coordination, communication, and information. The requirement for C4 is important, and you might ask yourself, why is it important for a major sporting event? Because events like this happen internationally all over the world, and they seem to happen seamlessly when you look at it on TV, but I can promise you from my experience, the command, control, coordination in the background is not seamless. It is a very complex environment. And if you think what you see on the TV at a major sporting event is just a tiny fraction of what's going on in the background. The background is probably the most complex structure you could imagine. There are a number of competing demands from organising committees, from the authorities who own the sport, as well as the broadcast and other individuals who do. So it's a very complex and challenging environment, and it moves constantly. So it's very important, therefore, to make sure that in a time of crisis, as we move out of steady state, that we have a command, control, coordination and communication system which is fit to deal with those systems. So whenever there's an issue and whenever there's a problem, we need to make sure that the right people are informed at the right time to be in the right place. The definition of command, control, coordination, communication and information is again something which differs from event to event, but a generic example, as you can see, appears on there. So command is the main area of the forces. We need to be able to make sure that what we want to achieve, we recognise what we want to achieve, and we have the authority in order to do so. Everything else fits around there. So all those decisions which are made are fed by the information or the intelligence, which is information plus an analysis, which creates intelligence. And all of those factors feed in to those 4 C's. So, for example, any one of us, as we would sit down and make a decision, we gather the information intelligence which is available, and we do that as a matter of course in human nature. So within that gathering of the information, gathering the intelligence, we also then do an analysis of that information and intelligence to decide what's fact and assumption. Because only after we've decided what's fact and assumption can we then make a decision as to what options we have available to us. And obviously those options need to be options which are legal and are proportionate to whatever that threat and risk is. So command and control, we try and build on that framework. We try and build on the framework to make sure that the information that we have, we're able to test. We're able to make sure that it actually is genuine information, that it is not assumption. We're not basing it on rumour. So we have to have that system in place which allows us to analyse that information, grade it, and then that can inform our decisions. So that really is the basis of your first step in your command and control system. Once you have that in place, then we need to make sure that it's recorded, so we can gather that information at a later date and review that, and then it's communicated, and then we coordinate the response to make sure we have, in the events world, a multi-agency, multi-strategy approach to dealing with it. Because invariably, it's not just one unit which will end up dealing with it. And if you look at an event, in any international sporting event, you have a number of different areas which will have some involvement in that resolution process. So, for instance, if you have a person who falls down the stairs at a major event and injure themselves, not only will you have security who are involved in that initial stage, you'll have the emergency services who will arrive to take that person away, you'll have the medical response in order to deal with that person at hospital. If the person isn't a local, it's a foreign national, you'll have the embassies and the foreign national embassies coming in to ask questions around it. All that information needs to be gathered, stored, and make sure that when those difficult questions are asked, that we have the answers to those difficult questions. And they are very, very regular within the events world. Every day in the events world is like a tabletop exercise, I guarantee it. So as we've touched on, and as you can see from there, why do we need the structure that I've explained? Why do we need that in place? So we need it in place for a number of reasons. So the environment itself is really complex, and I've tried to explain to you how complex that environment is, how many different players we have moving within that same field. We have a huge amount of workforce, we have a huge amount of clients, we have a huge amount of spectators. So if you can imagine at an event, you may have within a stadium, and I'll use stadiums if you forgive me as an example, but there are many other venues which aren't stadiums. So if we talk about a stadium, within a stadium, you will have from a workforce perspective, and if we look at security as an example, so merely from a security surface, you have potentially anywhere up to maybe 2,000 members of security at one stadium. So you look at somewhere like Wembley in the UK, they will have 1,200 stewards and security workforce working at any one event. Build onto that the back of house and the business as usual security staff, and those numbers increase. So you can see that even from that one functional area of security, then you have a huge amount of workforce which are there. Add to that cleaning, huge amount of cleaning staff which need require to be looked after, catering, the numbers go on. Major sporting events, it's very popular at the moment to have volunteers. Volunteers bring with them a lot of advantages, but they bring with a lot of disadvantages as well. So volunteers are not paid workforce, but they are treated as workforce, and as such they need to go through that same accreditation process. But again, we have to make sure that we're not creating an insider threat with those volunteers which we arrive, because a lot of the times the same people will look to try and do events again and again and again, and some of them do cause us problems. So, and all of them have competing demands and different expectations of what they want from the event. To a spectator, what they want from an event is completely different than what a paid workforce or indeed a volunteer wants from that event. So that's why the communication process between those groups and those functional areas are very, very difficult and need to be tailored accordingly. So, and again, if you look at the processes which happen hundreds of times a day, it's very important that the people are in the right place at the right time to do the right job. So, and that's very simple from even the arrival of the teams. So that the amount of choreography that goes into an arrival of a team, whether it be a rugby team, a football team or a cricket team, is immense, because you have the secure convoy, which needs to set off from its hotel at the right time in order to get to the stadium at the right time, in order to go through the entry points and the vehicle search areas at the right time, to make sure that both teams don't arrive simultaneously, and that you can then bring people in. So if you imagine somewhere like Twickenham, which is a rugby event in the UK and London, then you've got to be extremely careful that you don't end up with teams being slowed down en route because an initial team who was due to come in first has had to slow down, and then you have all your security team in order to close off the gates to make sure that the venue search areas are clear for that route to come in. So all those processes and procedures that need to be in place behind the scenes to make sure that that vehicle can drive safely through, and it's only the vehicles that you require to be in that location come in. So you don't have people tailgating, so you know how many people are in that convoy, what that last vehicle of that convoy is. Everybody on that convoy is accredited, everyone has the correct documentation when they arrive, and we get everybody off the bus and into the changing rooms at the right time. So even a very simple process, which I'm sure that most of you have watched thousands of times on TV, of teams arriving and press speaking to those, you will see that choreography and the planning that goes into that is immense. And that's just one very small aspect of the event. Again, the understanding around looking at that example, understanding again how the partners and other stakeholders are included within that. So how are the functional areas working for the event, how they need to make sure that they don't have the wrong people in the wrong place, and how they then fit in with those client groups. Again, it's just a complex, it's an absolute minefield to work within. And the other thing which is worthy of note, and I think it's sometimes something that we certainly forget on a regular basis, is that not everybody who is doing it has done it before. So there may be people who were within the organisation, whether it be the local organising committee, whether it be the stadium itself, or whether it be the security services, have actually done the event before. A lot of the times we have instances where people don't understand some of the terminology which we use within the events world. It's a very niche market. So there are people, as I look around, I can see people in the audience who do work in the events field, and if I speak to them and use some of the terminology, they will understand straight away. So if I start talking about bubble to bubble, I start about VSAs, PSAs, people will get and understand what I mean. Unfortunately, some people don't understand that. People don't understand how accreditation works. People don't understand the complex world around the areas, and making sure that from an accreditation perspective that you can't go from front of house to back of house unless you've got the appropriate accreditation. So again, there may be instances whereby you have members of your team will arrive, and because they don't have the appropriate accreditation number on their accreditation, that they can't move between front of house and back of house. So they have to leave a stadium and walk around the entirety of the stadium to get 100 metres because of a mistake which has been made in the accreditation process. So again, it's making sure from an event planning perspective that we understand that there's a lot of explanation has to be given to a lot of the acronyms that we use and a lot of the terminology. So in order to achieve this, what do we actually need? So what do we need in place to achieve what we want? So as you can see from the board, and I've already mentioned, clearly we need an incident management system. We need to be able to record an incident or an occurrence, and we need to be able to make sure that that when we recover that we're in a position to learn from it and make sure that doesn't happen again. So for instance, if there's an incident at the stadium, we need to do a hot debrief on why that incident occurred. So why has that happened? How can we stop it from happening again? And in the case of 2022 in Qatar, where there are 4 games a day, we need to make sure that the same isn't going to happen at another stadium and later on in the day, because that's when it becomes very embarrassing from a security perspective. If we have that constant security breach, it becomes embarrassing for us, and it's embarrassing for the state of Qatar as well. So for instance, we've seen, particularly in the modern world, that there's a desire to invade the field of play, and there's a desire from certain individuals, whether they're political or whether they're commercial, to get onto the field of play and to disrupt the event. They know that if they're sufficiently noteworthy, then they will appear in the press. There'll be local agreements with broadcast to say they will not appear on the TV screens, but there will not be that same agreement with international press. So if someone comes on the field of play and they're noteworthy, then what will happen is they will appear in the local press. If they have a website plastered across their shirt, then the amount of revenue that can be made from that is quite significant. So again, if that happens at one event, then we need to make sure that doesn't happen at event number 2, event number 3, and event number 4, because if it does, it'll be very embarrassing for us. Again, the integrated communication system, and as I've said, some of the key individuals, so there'll be the venue security, there'll be Q22 security, and there will be the state of Qatar security, so state security will be there. So how do we integrate the communication between those 3 groups? And we need to make sure that with the requirements that Tetra places upon us, that we have the systems in place to accommodate the different channels that are required. Because in steady state, we'd probably get away with it, but if it went into crisis state and we needed to do something, then the guarantee is that a number of those slots on those Tetra will drop out, and some of those key groups, whether they be spectator services or whether they be stewards, might drop off that system. So again, it's making sure that we have an integrated system that during a state of an emergency or crisis, then we can manage and move from. Common operating picture. We need to know what's happening across the whole arena. So the whole tournament, we need an operating picture which is a single source of truth. We have to understand that what I'm hearing in the command room is the same as what someone is hearing in the control room, and that people are making decisions which are appropriate at their level. So if there's an incident which is potentially going to cause a knock-on effect to the nation or indeed the tournament wider, then those decisions need to be explained and passed on via the incident management system through a common operating picture. Clearly, in this day and age, CCTV is extremely important, and it's a very useful crime prevention and post-incident interrogation system. So access to CCTV in your control rooms and your command rooms is extremely important, because that allows you to interrogate systems almost instantaneously. So if I can give you an example of an incident which occurred to me in the London Stadium in 2017, and I'll explain how important CCTV is in this context, is a decision was made by the IAAF that because athletes were protected or an important client group, and they weren't expected to bring an awful lot of equipment with them, just bags containing their uniforms, etc., that they would be allowed to go through the search areas at the athlete access points without any need to search. Unfortunately, there was some athletes who shared accreditations, and they were able to allow someone to get into the venue with the wrong accreditation. That person was dragging behind them a trolley case. That was 9 o'clock in the morning. Unfortunately, they then left the venue without the trolley case. They were confronted by the stewards, who identified that it wasn't the individual who was on the accreditation, and then concerned of what was happened, that person then ran off. So it was a very, very busy day. So 2 events, morning event, 55,000, afternoon event, 55,000, and we were between those 2 events. So they're in the process of cleaning the stadium down when I got the call to say, we've lost an individual, he's run off, we've got the accreditation. And it was then able to say, okay, from the accreditation, check with the accreditation, find out which entry point they came in, which, because it was an RFID within the accreditation, we were able to do that fairly swiftly. We were then able to interrogate the CCTV cameras to find out where the individual had gone, whether that trolley case had been searched, and on this occasion it had been searched, which reduced the threat quite severely. And then we were able to track that person's route to find out where that trolley case was. Now, if you can imagine, without that access to that CCTV system on that occasion, we would have been in a very difficult position with 55,000 people waiting to come into a stadium and somebody coming in who'd made off from us and left a trolley case somewhere within that stadium, which we didn't know whether it had been searched or not. And if we'd followed IFF criteria, probably wouldn't have been searched. So that sort of rapid interrogation process, that very, very quick information that we can do, can save you an awful lot of time and an awful lot of embarrassment. So it's CCTV, it's everywhere. We just need to make sure that we're able to access and take those key points from it. The intelligence as well is very, very important. So, is very important. So from an intelligence perspective, we need the most current, up-to-date intelligence in order to make those decisions. So when I talked about your decision making and how you make your decisions and why you do a particular thing at a particular time, all of that is determined by intelligence. So your arrival here today would be determined by the intelligence which you'd gained either from the internet or alternatively from your own knowledge around the event. So people who hadn't been here before may very well have checked for where to park, may very well have looked where they need to go. So all of that intelligence was important to the decision that you made. And it's exactly the same in the other environment. In a large sporting event environment, you need to make that right decision, you need that information and intelligence. So if you're going to decide to, and the worst case scenario for us is if you pull the pin and decide that you're not going to go ahead with the event because there's a security risk, and then you find that the information and intelligence you've had was assumption and not fact, then again there's a huge amount of impact that that's going to have, not only for the organisers but also internationally around broadcast rights and everything that goes with it, as well as the reputation for the country as well. So every decision that needs to be made with the most current, up-to-date intelligence. And as I said before, the difference between information and intelligence is information plus analysis equals intelligence. So there needs to be some fact-checking, some decision, some idea of it's been scrutinised and we've confirmed that it's not an assumption, it's a fact before we make those decisions. And again, lastly, we need to make sure, because there are so many decisions to be made, there are so many incidents which happen, that those decisions and those incidents are dealt with at that most appropriate level. So it's very easy for someone to take authority and say, I'm going to deal with this, but we need to make sure that there's an escalation process in place whereby people make the decision at that lowest possible level. Otherwise, what we end up with is we end up in a position where everything is referred up, so that you find that your gold commander, who's in charge of it, is the one who is having to make decisions on sometimes the very minor incidents. So be mindful of the fact that when we talk about an escalation process, that we need in command thresholds, that we need to make sure that the right incidents are dealt with at the right level, and that what's escalated needs to be escalated, but more importantly, what doesn't need to be escalated isn't escalated. So I thought I would talk a little bit about operational command and using the previous event from this country as an example of how the structures fit together. The event I'm going to describe was the first Champions League, the AFC Champions League, which took place in this country at the end of last year. And Obviously, it took place in a very complex environment around COVID and a lot of issues in relation to travel and spectator numbers, which I think you may get some presentations on after me. But purely from a command and control, it's bear in mind how simple that event was from a planning perspective, how complex some of those relationships were. So 4 venues, 4 very minor venues, so very few spectators. We're not talking about major spectators, we're talking about some spectators, and none of them working simultaneously, so maybe 2 events per day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. So, and what this represents is just those communication lines. So what we have, if you look at Al-Sad at the top, we have the 5 key domains of there. So we've got the venue media centre, which is where broadcast pay events an awful lot of money to be to represent and display our event and showcase it. So they're a key client group. So we need to make sure that they have the ability to bring their equipment in and deal with their broadcast. A venue operations centre, which is required for every venue. So every venue, this venue and every other venue, will have a venue operations centre, which will look after facility management and will look after the general day-to-day security of the venue. And then we have a security control room. The security control room is the key from a security perspective, running 24/7 every day. So your business as usual, your perimeters, your alarm checks, your fire checks will all be within a security control room. So we then have to look at the relationship between that security control room and that venue operations centre, because the operation from a 24/7 is significantly different than the operation for an event, because we're inviting, in some events, maybe 100,000 people into our building, and as I've already mentioned, huge number of staff also into the building as well. So we need to make sure that they're safe and that they're secure. As well as the other matter, which is last mile. Now, last mile is referred to in a number of different ways, in a number of different events. So you may have heard it previously as grey space or zone X, but it's basically the distance between your transport hub, which you can see on there, and your stadium. So your last mile may be a distance of 100 metres, it may be a distance of 3 kilometres. It's not a geographical measurement, it is merely a distance or the explanation of that distance between your transport hub and your stadium. And there are a lot of issues which can happen within your last mile, and it's very important that that's integrated. You have business as usual, you have spectator services all working within that area. You, in addition to that, you also have your LOC security working within that area, your organising committee security, so Q22 or whoever working in that area. And we need that integration to make sure that if something happens, then we can respond to that, because because of the level of security that we put on the stadium, sometimes it can be very easy for those anybody who wants to cause us any harm, anybody who wants to cause anybody else any harm, the easiest place to do it would be within that last mile. It's a large crowded space, lots of people there, it's associated with the event, but it doesn't have the same level of security that entering a stadium does. So again, it's something to be mindful of, particularly in the events world, is the harder we make it for people to get restricted, prohibited items into that venue, the more attractive that last mile becomes. So all that communication on event time needs to be coordinated, and it's coordinated via the venue operations centre, and the venue operations centre would then go into the national or the tournament command centre, which is at the national command centre, and then that is the command function. Now, what ideally we would want within any event is that 95% of all the incidents, security incidents, are dealt with at that venue level. And it's only the most serious of incidents which are moved forward and pushed up to that to the TCC, the Tournament Command Centre, and then there may be a requirement for business as usual to become involved, additional resources requirement or whatever, and then that would move on to the National Operations Centre, which would be in the state of Qatar, is duly located. So again, it's a very simple schematic, but I think demonstrates on a very simple tournament sometimes how those communication lines need to go. And it's very difficult sometimes to get people out of a mindset of what they do as a general rule. So, and if we make it too difficult for people to communicate, unfortunately what happens is people revert back to the path of least resistance. So if I can't contact someone, then, or someone can't contact me, then they'll try and ring me on my private mobile phone if they have my number, or they'll WhatsApp me. And again, if we do that, then unfortunately that communication chain and that decision-making process, we've lost those key decisions, and we've lost that information as to why we made those key decisions. So again, it's making sure that the communication system is manageable, and we're able, and it doesn't become overwhelmed, particularly in crisis state, when everybody is trying to shout on a radio or contact a command room via landline on the same number. So ensuring that we have enough scope and capacity to deal with crisis state as well as steady state. And that's just a very quick example of how that would work. So how we would split up those talk groups from a Tetra perspective, and how we would look to separate those. So with obviously with a command talk channel for the group. So the communication within the venue between the security around those areas, and then feeding in via Tetra to the a liaison desk within the command center. And again, there are different. Q22 will have a similar system for their communication lines, and it'll go through to their own command center, which will be, I'm sure you may hear about later, which is the main operations center, which will work from an event perspective. So again, that just reinforces the complex nature. Now multiply that fivefold, and you get an idea of the impact that the FIFA World Cup's going to have upon us. It's a fairly unique event, having worked in single sport events before. They tend to be scattered across an entire nation, and very rarely do we have a single sport event in one city, which we have here. If you can imagine increasing your population by 100%, and the impact that that's going to have on your transport infrastructure, your security, your day-to-day security, you're going to have a lot of people coming in, a lot of people who won't be familiar with the customs and of the country, won't be familiar with the geography of the location, and some of them unfortunately will take advantage of other people who maybe not quite as security minded as some of us are. So we fully anticipate that there'll be an increase in violence, theft, and every other issue that a Football World Cup brings with it. So it's making sure that our business as usual also manages to fit in with that, which is why the National Operations Centre is so closely aligned to the Tournament Command Centre. Now, I was going to very quickly mention gold, silver, bronze, and whether everybody's aware of the way in which the gold, silver, bronze structure works within the policing and military, as well as events. And it's a structure which we adopt on a regular basis. So we have a gold who sits at the very top. They're very much the strategic decision makers. They set the strategy of what we want to achieve, the vision, the aims of the event. We then, silver is at that tactical level, and from that tactical level, they set out what their tactical plan is. So what that strategy is. So their tactical plan will be to set an aim and objective for the bronze, who then delivers that tactical plan through their operational activities. So a very simple example of that is the gold might set a strategy to say that we want a safe World Cup. The silver sets the strategy to say that this is how we're going to do it, and then the bronze implements that structure. So a very simple way of doing it. And there are multiple, there's only ever one gold within a domain, but there are multiple silvers and multiple bronzes who deliver that So as a very simple example, we have the safe event. Everybody's going to be searched, is the silver strategy when they come in, and then the bronze implement that tactical plan by working out how that throughput at the PSAs, how that search goes through, and what does. So again, a very, very, very simple explanation of how that structure works. And a little complex diagram for you to finish on. And it's really just to try and reinforce what that escalation process should be. So where that threshold of command sits and where that escalation should be. So we know that because of the close relationships between business as usual and the event, that we have that calls will come in either via the venue operations center, via radio from somebody on the venue, or via the 999 system into the current state of Qatar National Operations Center. And then we need to make sure that they're graded and people are directed accordingly. So an example would be if someone has their bag stolen from a stadium, they may ring 999 to say that they've had their handbag stolen or their laptop stolen. You would not be able to send a normal resource to the stadium as you would do as you're within Qatar's normal business as usual deployment protocol. It would need to go a different route, and that's why the TCC sits there, because that incident would be recorded, passed to the TCC, and then they would be dealt with within the stadium. So, and the security incident would be identified and then graded as we move forward. So there are simply 11 examples on there, and the reason that I put those examples on there is to those 11 areas, because it makes it a little bit simpler when we move forward and we get to the incident recovery phase, is who needs to pick up the inquiries, who needs to deal with that at the end of it. So it's fairly obvious for us. If we talk about a fire at a stadium, then we don't want the emergency medical services picking up the inquiries and the incident recovery to do with that. The investigation needs to be done by the civil defence. So it's making sure that the right people are informed and the right people are aware of the requirements which are placed on them from that incident recovery phase. Then it's a case of, from the escalation point of view, as I've said before, making sure that the right people are there to do the right decision at the right time. So making sure that if it's a routine incident and it's it's something which we've planned for within our policies, procedures, that we have systems in place, we can deal with that. Very much venue-led, very much venue manager. Q22 venue manager would lead on that. Only if the matter began to escalate, you would then look at your wider security team at the stadium, and then after that, it would be a case if it continued to escalate, you would then look to maybe move for assistance, or a wider issue would then move as a significant incident into the tournament command centre, and the tournament silver would look from there, and then into a major incident which would have obviously a huge effect on the state of Qatar. So something that would be well beyond the remit of the tournament command centre and into the national crisis management. So that's just a very, very quick whistle-stop tour. I think we're okay for time for 5 minutes of questions if anyone has any questions. If not, then thank you very much.